An engineer at soul, MBA by qualification, and transformation enthusiast by role, our upcoming expert strongly believes that IT infrastructure is the soul of delivering core values for any business model. He's responsible for positioning them as the best enablers. In his current role as a solutions expert, hybrid cloud, and DevSecOps at EY India, he caters to customer goals on cloud adoption strategies, cloud readiness modeling, and defining custom approach for cloud onboarding. He is all ready to give his deep insights on the essence of security into DevOps value stream. Are you ready? So then let's get ready together to welcome on our beautiful screens the one and only Mr. Santanoo Bhattacharjee.
I'm Santanoo Bhattacharjee. I'm one of the subject matter experts in the field of hybrid cloud and DevSecOps solutioning for EY India. So I basically cater to the financial services market, and predominantly almost all my client bases are the financial service giants of the world. Starts from Morgan Stanley, goes to JPMC and all. So what we have seen, and I'm very much excited about this whole key agenda of the summit, DevSecOps, because the part that I liked more about this whole topic of the summit is that we are kind of keeping up the pace in terms of how DevOps as a culture has been shaping up, and how from a conventional model of how over the period of the last decade, Agile is picking up momentum and DevOps is one of the key accelerators as a model. So we are going to talk a bit more in a bit more broader fashion, scoping how DevOps came into the picture and how it was realized over time that security stays one of the key building constructs, and how can they bake in by design. Covering all how at the end a resilient continuous delivery model is to be built, with security being the key parameter of the whole design, is what we are going to cover today. And in the end, I'm going to talk you through a couple of real-world use cases that we are in talks with, or we have done implementation on with a lot of financial services client, and that's picking up a positive momentum of its adaptability. So to begin with, I'll quickly give a snapshot of the industry, how the DevOps market as such looks. So in terms of a quick snapshot, you see that the top row talks about the last 3 years. So what we see that almost, and these all are representational numbers from multiple sources, starting from DevOps reports, from Puppet Labs, IBM Research, and our own EY Research. So we did interview close to 3,000 developers and practitioners, where we kind of understood that in the last 3 years, even though they have started using tools and using processes, but still there were significant increase in application vulnerabilities. And of that percentage, or maybe of the number that we see, almost 3/4 of the vulnerabilities that were deep dived on were indirect dependencies. So they are not directly a construct of the code or the coding practice that the teams are doing, but maybe these are kind of sourced in from the APIs or the binaries, which they have at a very early stage integrated in their code construct. But later point of time, they do not have any choice to remove it, because that is the foundational element. And that's the reason, even though they have somewhat transformed their logic of writing codes from monolith to microservices, but still security was not thought through at the earlier stages. And a certain portion of the participants, we kind of saw close to 35 odd percentage of developers were a bit reluctant at the initial stage to think through security, because they still had that preconception that bringing in security much earlier is just going to delay their deliverable timelines. One of the key findings which we usually talk about is when to bring in the practice of security in the whole phase-wise for software development. So this is a very wonderful research made by IBM, where identifying 4 key blocks of a development stage, the design, implementation, and testing, as well as maintenance, it kind of shows that how security left model arrived. So evolutionary, we see that a lot of companies or a lot of product development units, they were very much happy with maintaining their code and fixing or course correcting basis their findings from the maintenance stages. But the cost to recover from what they have found at a product run stage was very high. So that kind of gave them a lay of the land that security needs to be shifted much earlier in the way we do our development of products. And the red zone that you see was basically one of the, I think, key driving factors of how security started getting much more attention in the earlier stages. So the red zone was something that typically was a culture to course correct before 2011 or 2012. But evolutionary, the yellow zone is the piece where a lot of companies are trying to build up security pillars. So right now, almost, I think, till 2018, as a part of few product companies as well, I saw a lot of pods, development pods, were too much interested to do any security related fix or findings that they get on the implementation and testing stage. But they were still culturally, or maybe, if I may put it, technically not ready to have that level of clarity about security on the design stage. But that's how the security left model is evolving across the industry. And this research kind of gives us some very great findings about how the organizations, the top performing organizations, are shaping up their whole investment plan in terms of how transformation is to be done. But I kind of like the State of the DevOps report in 2019, which talks about the top 6 stages of how security was done back then and how security is to be perceived from now on. So if you see from stage 0 to stage 5, these are the maybe evolutionary stages of how infrastructure or DevOps is to be, infrastructure around DevOps is to be grown. So from stage 0 to stage 2, these are the building constructs where we kind of do the design phase, we kind of standardize the whole feature set, we define the outline of the whole product capability. And once we are done, we move to stage 3, which talks about the implementation and the extension of the product. So how are we expanding the capability of the product? What exactly are the integrable components of the whole portfolio? And this is where security was parked. And from stage 3 onwards, it started picking up its due importance. So what happens is when you pick up security at a stage 3 or beyond, stage 4 and stage 5 are much advanced level, and this is maybe a lot of dream come true for the operations unit of any companies we speak to. But just confining our discussion to stage 3, it was made very obvious that if we pick up security from stage 3, we are just going to do patchwork in terms of what we have done wrong in the earlier stages. So what this, and I'll recommend this report for everybody, all the practitioners, to go through in detail, because it talks about wonderful elements of how cost is driven in terms of where are you integrating security. I'll have some bits and chunks across the other slides, but all in all, the more you shift security from stage 3 and on the earlier stages, it's bound to be more easier for you to go live on the planned date. And there's a very wonderful quote from Mike Buzzell. I think I've just attended one of the events way back in 2019 where I've got this quote very much, hard-coded in my wall as well, that if you do DevOps properly, you just have to think security for it. You cannot park security and pick up when you think it's needed. It has to be well thought through across all the stages. So DevOps is moving from DevOps to DevSecOps is not just an evolution, I'll say. It always was there. It was just not well thought through in terms of making it applicable for all the cases that we use DevOps for. So moving on from this, the first bit that any development team or maybe any practitioner pod that we talk to has to think is going back to the drawing board and figuring out what are the key pillars by design that we talk to in terms of getting DevOps ready. So if we see the loop of DevOps and the top 8 to 9 constructs of how DevOps runs, starts from the plan phase, goes to the code, build, test, and at the end it's on operations, which we monitor. The right side is the green zone, which is the ops zone, who were conventionally or traditionally accountable. So for maintaining, operations or security and keeping all the KPIs as we need for security. But what happens is when we talk about the DevSecOps model, the fundamental of having security well within the code, well within every functionality that is getting delivered to ops is on the amber zone. So evolutionary, what we see is that there is a shift left of responsibilities as well. All that we see on the gray zone were there, they were done from a very long time, starting from compliance, validations, logging, and everything. But the part on the amber zone, it is more about how are we doing the code reviews. What exactly is the SAST or DAST finding that typically we do evaluate before we commit any code to this uncontrolled environments as well as the controlled environments. How are we integrating the key policies and the accelerators that typically may strengthen our security models or maybe the security presence of the code that we are building. And so, in essence, addressing the security issues much earlier and thinking it through maybe sprint one onwards, not sprint zero, I'll say, but sprint one onwards gives us much control on our deliverable. And as the product grows, as the capability grows, it kind of builds across a lot of unwanted dependencies, which at later point of time, even though we want to let off go, we can't, because it's a building construct. So any practitioner who is planning to implement DevOps within the team has to follow three golden rules. Number one being, it's not a ops responsibility, it's equally a development responsibility. Number two being, identify the key constructs within development backlog wherein you can integrate DAST and SAST models, static analysis of the code that you are building it up on, and dynamic analysis of all the integrable components that you will be utilizing on. And basis the threat modeling that's still on paper, how much of an adaptability your code has got basis every commit you make. So that's one of the key elements every architect nowadays are looking forward to, who think of DevSecOps model to be imbibed within the sprint one plan. And the third bit is creating a much more controlled build cycle. When I say it, if within the lower environments, there is a security flaw, or maybe in terms of a DAST and SAST finding, or maybe a quality finding is not giving us the exact outcome that we need, the code should not be allowed to move ahead beyond development or beyond the local development, if I may put it. So there should be strict practices in place so that once it goes, and that's more of a culture perception. So once it goes beyond development, any analysis that we do around security should give equal, if not better, what we have left at development. And that's how, the finding typically says that you think through your security on the early stages, later point of time, you won't have to worry about it. Moving on, the fundamental baking in model, which is one of the key anchor slides of my conversation today, talks about the cycles where we are still to commit the code, and this is all on to the development ecosystem. So onto how are we planning for every commit? What all are we considering apart from just the feature in every commit? Even if we are doing it a local build or a local test, what are the testing models and local build models that we have been evaluating our code base against? And once, just I think from the delivery stage, once it is ready for deployment and we kind of think through that this goes into development environment and just on a single click, it can go across multiple the cluster of environments that it is supposed to go on the 3-tier or 5-tier environment plan I have. It should be equally responsive, equally in terms of performance, in terms of security, be responding to whatever I need. So in terms of, if you see the first initiation and discovery pillars, how are we evaluating our commits? Basis every commit, what exactly are the feedbacks that we are getting in terms of security? Are we integrating those changes immediately, or are we just parking it for soon, or maybe parking it for a better future that somebody else can come and course correct your security posture? So everything that happens at the pre-commit and commit stage is going to give you a security control much higher in terms of security rating, much higher than if you just park it for the later point of stages on the build and test. And all the cycle that we see on the slide is much better for an accelerated innovation adopting DevOps, or maybe with security, it's on DevSecOps. And it kind of gives you an immunity. So once you are done with all the security blends that you have to do on your code, you don't have to worry about the kind of checks or the kind of security models later point of time your feature code is going to get exposed to, because you're well thought through it. So with the advancement of expansion or maybe scalability of your applications, the entire threat posture is expanding. So with things around DDoS, with things around web, we are susceptible to a lot of exposures. Now, unless and until the core blocks are very well aligned to known security boundaries, you will not be considering these in the initial stages. So any architect who is planning to bake in security and elevate their delivery quality over time, they have to define the building constructs starting from, in terms of scalability, if my code goes, what are the security blends I have to think through now? In terms of the microservices evolution into containers, what could be the security posture I should be thinking through? Things like it. So everything that can happen to your code or your feature code is going to get exposed to at later point of time. If you somehow are ready to define an outline at the pre-commit, commit, and build stage locally, you will get much more control security-wise of your code. And this is what baking in during the initial stages meant. Now, what happens is, if you build in security at the very early sprints or maybe the early stages, your quality evolves very linearly across time. So the entire journey to cloud, be it the entire journey to container ecosystem, anywhere in the platform ecosystem we try and deploy our code bases on, what we see is that it's an API-driven world. So a lot of third-party application integrations, a lot of external maybe softwares will be integrated as a part of your code. As long as your entire platform, which anyways is ready to handle any kind of with the growth of hybrid cloud models and everything, you see that the platform is capable of every kind of expansion you have. But as long as your code is also ready to adapt to that kind of model, where it can scale when it needs, it can cross geographical boundaries when it needs, it should think through the security exposures as well. So if you are well thought through during your initial inception stages, so be it threat modeling, be it from the environment side, how are you securing it, be it the golden loop that we call it, from commit to CI to CD to QAs, and continuously how are you evaluating your code commits through the code reviews. Any clearance that we kind of expect our code to go through and get a good security posture rating from any independent body always stays high. So if they are, all in all, if they are perceived at a very mid-level to late-level stage, you have done a good work, but maybe there are some logics which may evolutionarily create leaks, or there are some integration which eventually during a whitelisting effort or during a exposure to an application during the scalability models that we implement can come up. You will not have much of a time to rethink the whole code posture or the code architecture, which talks more about the security blend. So the more you part security for the later stages, the more challenges you may bring to your code, which can do wonders if the security is thought through in the very first two stages. And in the entire essence of getting continuous delivery as a culture in a much secure way, what we see that, so if this is a 3-tier environment, be it this is a 5-tier environment, let's pool the environments in a controlled setup and an uncontrolled setup. So the uncontrolled environment stays the low-hanging environments, dev, QAs, and the internal environments. But all the controlled environments, they conventionally and maybe from a traditional practice have stayed in much controlled fashion. So any deployments that we do there, maybe the DRs, the pre-prods or the prods, the deployment is much controlled, and still there are gate clearances that is needed to deploy it. Acceleration, be it zero downtime, be it feature deployments, be it the blue-green models we speak of. There is a technical capability. So I'll just quote and unquote the technical capability again, where you can think through an automated deployment to your controlled environments as well, provided the main part, security, is thought through at a very, very granular level on all the earlier constructs of the deliveries you have done of your feature. So the entire product, if that composes of 10 features and you have just built up the product and at later point of time done the security blend, and then you deploy it, it's a two risk of a profile deployment that I'll put, which later on can bring unwanted risk. But if in all the 10 features you have independently given a thought of all the threat vectors, all the testing coverages are properly done in terms of security, in terms of sanity, in terms of the exploratory test. So this kind of makes it very, very comfortable for anybody to give you a go ahead to get a blue-green deployment model applicable for any drops you want to do. So continuous delivery by essence means that, and if you have to implement a continuous delivery culture of doing development, you cannot skip security at any point of time. You have to start thinking security from your zeroth commit. So that's maybe one of the key messages I typically give to almost all the development pods I speak to, that in any point of time, if there is a thought of parking security and revisiting later, you are just bringing more challenges for you later point of time where your code may not be eligible to achieve aspirational model of getting a continuous delivery culture. Having said that, I'll just land up to the last slide where a couple of use cases I wanted to revisit on and talk you guys through on how we have built up a DevSecOps culture across multiple financial services client that we have been engaged with. So the first part is where what we have seen a couple of key driving factors, be it the whitelisting of every binaries and dependencies they use, be it the continuous inspection model with tools like SonarQube and Fortify checkmarks that they have in place. There's their kind of threat coverage, threat perception, their functional performance testing and penetration testing coverage outcomes, and their understanding of how this is to be done. And all in all, how security by design is what they have created as a design fundamental of every development they do. So these are the building constructs. If they were once identified and they have got their own findings very clear about it, the security findings have given us substantial elements to build up a very robust model where anything that they have experienced, so maybe there are 1 lakh cases that they have given us as a sample, but sampling everything, anything that they may experience later point of time, which typically we can foresee it, we can get a very easy gate sign off if we think through it, on the sprint 0 onwards. So what I meant by it, that those findings, we kind of sampled templates on their quality portfolio, on their static analysis portfolio, their dynamic analysis portfolio, and build up templates of their scans basis every delivery they are doing from sprint 0, so that any point of time, any of the known factors were seen, immediately the code was not allowed to be at least on the development stage as well. So the developers were fundamentally very much challenged on the initial days that couple of things may need, a little bit of stitching up the features and then they can come and revisit it. But if they were put at a very hard block that unless until you meet all the 100 or plus criteria are defined on your template, you will not be even allowed to qualify for the QA stage. So the revisiting became more and more agile on the development deployments, and eventually when it was put across a timeline of when they needed their gate sign-off to be done, having this model in place gave them 100% success rate on getting a first gate sign-off or maybe the second gate of sign-off on time. So templating your findings and keeping it exactly in a strict control for as a strict control for the developers has given wonderful outcomes. Second part is more about the leadership. So what we see is, the second use case was more about consumption of multiple tools. So we know planning tool like Jira, or maybe from build tool like Jenkins or Bamboo, or maybe from deployment tools like Ansible or Excel deploy. Any tools that we see has got their independent capabilities. So a lot of DevOps leaders were kind of worried that they know they have got certain capabilities to know more about what they are doing. So be it monitoring, be it the whole CI/CD tools, but still they do not have a single visualization where they can log in and see their entire stage by stage, and basis their choice, they can deep dive on each and every stage and see what exactly is the block. So what we did is we built up a DevOps leader dashboard, which kind of integrates back with all the tools they have in their ecosystem and kind of refines every project basis BU. So if you just, basic the RBAC that you have on your dashboard, you log in, and basis the kind of leader you are in the hierarchy of logins, you can funnel down your BU, and basis that you will be funneling down your project, and basis the project, you have a third funnel on the kind of delivery, either you want it sprint wise or feature wise. And on that choice filter selection, you get a whole cycle of the number of features that were deployed on that day and what exactly went wrong, how it was mitigated, when it was mitigated, how long, and who are the key stakeholders who are involved in doing these course correction. So there was much of a KPI driven visibility on everything that's happening on the ground, and every leader loves it. So no matter how much we talk about what all these capabilities bring, but if I can at any point of time in real time log in into a system and see how my security posture of my entire portfolio is, and from there I quickly toggle back to how it is impacted by the build or maybe by the testing cycles. So all in all, a seamless dashboard integrable with almost all the DevOps constructs. And that's how the leaders were much more confident in having a DevOps capability which they need to evolve on. So unless and until they can see what exactly you have got in a very easy to visualize way, it's very tough for them to reinvest it later on. So that was one of the key capabilities we have built up. We kind of, on any mega assignments I work on, give this as a main deliverable for the leadership board to maybe from a month where we are done with the implementation and stuff, they can implementation of the tools and stuff. They can actually visualize their entire ecosystem of tools, their flow of tools, their integration of tools the way they want to. And this is a very use case driven dashboarding that we do. And this has actually given leaders much more confidence in how DevSecOps tooling and all this, capabilities we speak of looks like. And the third is more about the future, where we want to go with this evolution. So I know from DevOps to DevSecOps is the current trend. Maybe in future we will be very soon seeing something called as NoOps, which a lot of startups have already inculcated, and a lot of big organizations are also thinking through their capability because of this emergence of serverless and stuff. So what we see is that in this whole journey of moving into a NoOps model, or maybe in a much more refined model of doing operations, a lot of capabilities circle around how can we define our infrastructure as a plug and play services, or maybe what exactly are the complexities that we have right now and how we can minimize that. So any implementation, greenfield implementation of DevOps that we do for any fintechs or any financial services organization, we go across with a construct where we sample across a pod size of 20 to 25 people who are building up a capability, and basis that, be it infrastructure, be it the way they are provisioning their entire environments, and be it the DevOps as a pipeline model, be it the tools that they are choosing, they are to be made in such a way that they are reusable across the organization. So in that part, be it the ops tools, be it the development IDEs or the development tools, be it the DAST and SaaS tools, be it the security overall tools which circles around the penetration and threat modeling exercises. What we do is we sample across the tools, build up templates around it. The reusable assets are something which usually takes time on the initial load, but once a successful pod delivery of a particular product is done, that is a very easy fork and maybe lift and shift model for the organization to sample it and try it across different ways of doing development that they have done. So what basically we try and do is that not build up a siloed practice of DevSecOps tooling and infrastructure as a code models. We kind of build across everything parameterized, and this gives anybody who is because by the time we promise them something and deliver it, there is a huge change in the technology, which usually takes place in 6 to 8 months. So anytime we give them a reusable asset, they give as a commitment, they give us kind of a much better acceptance of having it, because after that you can obviously think about revitalizing using the next tech trend that you have in the market. So these are the couple of use cases we see. But all in all, in terms of the evolution, if you have well thought through your infrastructure into the three main parts, which is building up the entire pipeline, entire infrastructure as a reusable asset. Second, giving your development as well as your operations team much more security information in terms of how they can use the security knowledge that typically you've got much earlier when they start doing their activities or building up their products. That gives them much better confidence in building up a secure product. And the third part is the leaders are very, very, very much interested in seeing everything on runtime. So if we can build up capabilities around giving a runtime visualization of how my entire delivery and how my entire operations are working, it's much better than just being said that we can do it. It's something you have done. That's all for now. Thank you.